Hi, hello, and welcome to Shankar IAS Academy's daily current affairs analysis. Today's date is 10/2/2026, and please, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also hit on the bell icon if you want to receive instant updates. With that, let's move to the topics of today. The first topic of today is about the AI Impact Summit and how India is the first country in the global south to host it, and what are its themes and how it is relevant to inclusivity. The second is about the religious practice doctrine, the recent case in the Kerala High Court about the difference between a law and an act and rules, and how there is a different contradiction there and how the courts have decided to handle it. The third one is the disaster victim identification and how teats play a major role in the identification of victim, and how the Ahmedabad case and the air crash is one important thing that we have to note here. And the fourth one is about the cross-border jurisdiction and how when divorce proceedings happen, how two courts, when involved, create a bias there, and is forum shopping a major issue there is a question. And the fifth one is the prelims focus for the day. So today's first topic of the day is about AI and how India takes a major share today in the AI pie. This news is taken from the Indian Express, and let's see what this is about. The first is about the Indian AI Impact Summit. So the date on which this is happening is the 16th of February 2026, and the venue is in New Delhi in the Bharat Mandapa. This is the first time a summit is actually being held in the global south region. And what is the focus is the next question. The focus is the recommendation. The recommendations are based on what actions the country can take, and it is a non-binding regulation. We know that there are a lot of treaties where the regulations are bound, but here it is basically an advisory meeting that is happening, and the regulations are not bound here. So with that, the next is the organizer. Who is the organizer of this AI summit? It's the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So this is something that can be asked in the prelims point of view. And again, who anchors the event, or what is the committee along with the Ministry of Electronics and Communication that anchors the event is the Indian AI mission. So the India AI mission and Ministry of Electronics and Technology have a collaborative effort here. And again, this is a series of global AI summits, because AI summits have been happening from 2023 and 2022, and this is of significance because now AI has reached the common man's hand. Everybody is using AI such as ChatGPT, and we see a lot of memes, and we see a lot of people throwing in their very sensitive information to get some advice from the so-called AI. And that is why this global AI summit is of more significance than the ones that happened in 23 and in the years preceding that. So again, the AI Safety Summit happened in UK in November 2023, and the Bletchley Declaration. In the Bletchley Declaration, there were about 28 countries, and all of them were signatories to that. And what did they talk about in that? They spoke about the AI risks. They understood that AI is not something that will not have risks. So they analyzed the risks, the pros and cons, and they came up with a lot of solutions that can be handled very effectively. So now with this, the Seoul Summit happened in 2024. It spoke about how innovation and inclusivity should be a part, because when we talk about AI, there is also a scope for marginalization which happens. So they had the focus of inclusivity here. And next is the Paris Action Summit, which happened in 2025. They spoke about the economic opportunities that are hindered. So how do we tackle the economic opportunities that are hindered, and how do we guarantee the job security market is what they spoke about here. And next is the AI Impact Summit 2026, the first Global South Summit. It focuses on real world solutions and development needs. What are the developmental needs that we will need with the AI growing at a very sporadic rise? So, with this, India's unique approach. With this, we need to see one important thing. The first one is the social costs. See, it hinders the democratic process. Now, with India also having the elections that are coming up, we see a lot of deep fakes and election manifestos that are happening. This is also one of the major concerns that we have, not only with respect to India, but also with respect to the other countries during wartime. We saw that there were a lot of videos that were circulated in the social media, and we had a lot of trouble gauging what is actually true and what is not actually true. So this is one social and democratic cause why India needs to address the need of the hour. The second one is the economic angle. The economic angle talks about the job displacement, and when I talk about the job displacement, imagine somebody in your family is an informal labor. In that case, they do not have any kind of upskilling. So, with AI being on the rise, what will happen to their livelihood is one other integral question. This answers the economic angle, which is also important for this particular summit. The third one, now we have spoken about the social angle, the economic angle. The third one will be the strategic angle. Today, AI is weaponized. AI is completely capable of even building a bio war. It can tell what comes next. It can predict. So with this happening, we also know that there is a strategic angle to it. The fourth one is the panopticon angle. This is the surveillance angle, which is very integral for this AI summit. What is the surveillance angle? So you all know about the Hawthorne experiment. When that happens, you see that people behave based on their observance. They say that today in AI, the digital age, the observance is so high, and you feed in your data to this AI. Today, your social media feeds are based on what you search on your AI. It constantly monitors you. So today, people, when they feed in information, the aware individuals, they are very scared of being surveilled 24/7. And that is why this panopticon is something that we have to work on. With this, let's move to this. That's why the theme today is people, planet, and progress. Now it is shifting. We have seen the catastrophes here, the negative risks here, and that is why it is talking about the regulatory frameworks that we have to build in. And now the AI is for the on-ground problems, the present-day problems, and the development-oriented AI governance should be there. So this is not tech-based AI. If there is a question where it says it's a tech-based AI, no, it's a governance-based AI, and this reflects India's role as an emerging AI power. Because today, when India is in the global south, the first country to ever host a AI summit, it becomes the voice of the global south. Now, the three sutras for shaping sustainable AI future. The first one is people. See, people are from all diversities, from all places. So, when you're not able to have an inclusive environment for everybody, and when the algorithms are shaped in such a way that is a marginalization, it will not preserve dignity. But we have the first mantra as preserving dignity and ensuring inclusivity. This is the first angle. The second one is, see, with AI, they say that in Google, if you search one per search, if there is an environmental degradation of 1%, if you search the same thing in AI, there will be an environmental degradation 10 times more than what you do it in a Google search. So that is why the second angle of the planet is very important. And the third one is progress. Your progress, your research, it should be equitably shared. So when you have collaborations, when the research is shared, even in the 2023 summit, the main angle was to share the resources that you have. So these are the three sutras. One is people, planet, and progress. So again, what are the chakras? The chakras are, first one is you need it for economic development and for the social good. We saw the catastrophes from the economic angle and the social angle. So that is first. The second one is the AI resources that should be democratized, and with people and the governments having a shared resource, we can have something that can be done for the greater good. The third one is the resilience, the innovation, and the efficiency angle. The fourth is the human capital, because people now think that they are going to lose jobs. But when we had electricity first, we thought people are going to lose jobs, but it created more jobs. So the human capital, how it can be efficiently used, is something we have to work on. And the fifth one is the social empowerment angle. And the sixth one is the safe and trusted AI, which should stop the panopticon syndrome. And the seventh one is R&D in science, which is important. Now, China is also invited to the summit, but this is not a formal block. And the participation, the invitations are given out by the host country. So the host country decides who should attend and who should not attend. The signals, it shows that gradually the China tension that we have, the India-China tension that we have, is slowly easing, and we are coming into a diplomatic relationship with China. And again, in AI capacity building, we are also inclusive of China. This is the China factor that we are talking about. And with this, we have come to the prelims practice question for the day. The question is, with reference to AI Impact Summit 2026, consider the following statements. It is the first time that a global summit on AI governance is being hosted in the global south. Yes, the first statement is right. The summit aims to frame binding international regulations. We saw in the first slide it was not binding. It is a non-binding regulation on artificial intelligence. Which of the statements given above are right? So we know that the second statement is wrong. So anything with 2 will go. So the answer will be 1 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is 1 only. With this, we have come to the end of the first topic of the day and we move to the second topic. Recently, the Kerala High Court had given a judgment stating that Hindus and non-Hindus are allowed inside the temple premises, and the mismatch between rules and acts should not form in disharmony. So, what am I talking about and what is this news? Let's go into it and decode. So, the case background is that there was a temple priest in Kerala who invited two Christian priests into the Sri Parthasarathi temple in Kerala. So when they were invited during the Krishna Jayanti progression, a devotee had filed a case stating that this was not allowed. So the temple is administered by the Devaswanam board, the Travancore Devaswanam board, and the petition filed challenging the entry as a violation of the Kerala Places Public Worship Authorization of Entry Act and the same in rules. So the act did not give any prohibition. It did not create any feud. It stated that whoever wants to come can come. But the rules had a small change. It stated that people can enter, people only from the Hindu religion can enter, and that too it had some discriminated practices. So the court said that the petition is dismissed. Anybody has from any faith can enter the temple. It was observed in inconsistency because the Parent Act stated that there is no prohibition, but the Act stated that there is prohibition. It directed the state government to examine whether Rule 3A needs amendment. Rule 3A is what states that people from other communities cannot enter. So the petition also stated that should the Act be amended is the question. Now, the Kerala Hindu Places of Public Worship Act 1956. It was brought in to remove the discrimination among Hindus and to allow the entry of all sections and classes of Hindus. But it does not explicitly prohibit. It does not explicitly prohibit the entry of non-Hindus. Now, Rule 3A. Rule 3A in the Act, Rule 3A in the rules, it stated that non-Hindus are not allowed inside the temple no matter what. Now the conflict is that Parent Act is still silent on the non-Hindu prohibition thing, but the rule is stating that there is a non-Hindu prohibition. So this happens. Rules cannot go beyond the Parent Act. The doctrine of ultra vires states that when there is a rule that is happening, when there is an act that is going on, there is a legislative boundary beyond which a rule cannot go and say that it is more powerful, because always the act is more powerful than the rule. This is the doctrine of ultra vires. It talks about the boundary and the legislative space in which it can exert its power. So Article 13, it is inconsistent with the Constitution. And now we have a judicial review under Article 32, the constitutional remedy, and Article 226. And the subordinate legislation that came as a rule cannot override the legislative intent which was in the act. This is what is stated. With this, Article 25 we all know it is freedom of conscience and freedom of profession, practice and propagation of any religion. And this is subject to public order that we have morality, health and other fundamental rights. Again, Article 26 talks about the freedom to manage religious affairs. And Article 14 talks about the equality before law. Article 17 talks about the abolition of untouchability that happens. Now, we have certain cases, the Shirur Mutt case, the Sabarimala cases. These are all cases that talk about the temple entry of various legislations. In Sabarimala, we had the temple entry of women. In certain cases, we have women to have the priest role in temples. We see Dalit people, the caste operation to go away. So, Dalit people should be included in the priest cadre. So, there are a lot of Supreme Court judgments that have come in. But in this case, restricting non-Hindus may be a religious practice of that particular temple. It will come decade after decade. This is happening, but it's not essentially a religious practice. That is, it allows temple entry to all classes of Hindus, and temple entry proclamation of Travancore is in 1936. The temple reform movement against caste discrimination also happened. Now, we come to the prelims practice question of the day. If there is inconsistency between a parent act and rule framed under it, rules shall prevail. First statement itself is wrong. The act shall prevail. The essential religious practice doctrine was evolved by the Supreme Court. Yes. The Article 25 guarantees freedom of religion and is subject to public order, morality and health. So, statement 1 is wrong. So, the answer should be 2 and 3 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is 2 and 3 only. With this, we come to the end of the second topic of the day and we are moving to the third topic. So, the next topic of the day deals with something that happens during mass fatality incidents. So, in case of mass fatality incidents, we know that the bodies are all mingled. The states of the bodies cannot be predicted, and we don't know who is what and where this has happened, and there is a lot of confusion in how to handle all these. So now the government wanted to create a protocol for handling something as significant as this. So this is why we are going to talk about the first ever disaster identification guidelines. And the most important, the hero here is our teeth. Let's see why and how. It is released first, the Disaster Victim Identification Guidelines, that is the DVI. It is released by the National Disaster Management Authority, the NDMA. The objective is there is a scientific identification of victims in mass fatality incidents, and this is necessary. How do we identify the victims? They should be recognized properly, they should have been registered properly, and we should have a dignified handover of the remains, the last rites for the people, and the certification of the death as well. So the trigger is that lessons from Ahmedabad AI, the 171 plane, AI 171 plane, it crashed in 2025 due to the heat, the combustion and the crash. A lot of people could not be identified because their body and the corpses were in different states, and they had severe burning and they had commingling of remains. This made identification very, very difficult. This is why the guidelines have 4 stages. The first stage is the recovery stage. You are recovering the body. It should have a systematic recovery of the remains, and you should properly tag who the person is, map who the person is, and preserve the person. Next is about maintaining a chain of custody. Who is going to release the body? So first, who is the person you have to go? Second, who is the person you have to go? And who's the top official who will release the body? It's the chain of command. The recovery phase 1. Next is the post-mortem data collection phase. The legal examination by medicals, the DNA sampling that happens, and then the dental profiling. and then the fingerprinting. All of this are the stage 2. Then the ante-mortem data collection. So there are two things, post-mortem and ante-mortem. So ante-mortem is before, when the person is alive. So the personal data, the medical data and the dental records of the person before should also be that. This is why now experts are even suggested that people should have a annual data profiling done for their teeth. Okay, and the DNA samples from the families also should be collected to identify properly. The reconciliation is that matching the ante-mortem and the post-mortem. This data collection is the third one. Now we are matching both the ante-mortem and post-mortem records, and then you get a legal certification, and then this is your body is released to the family. So we have 4 stages: the recovery stage, the post-mortem stage, the ante-mortem stage, and the reconciliation stage. Now with this, there is also a primary identifier. That is first the fingerprint, the forensic ontology, the dental records. This is only a primary factor. And even here, if you're going to have your cavity records, then it might not help. Okay. The basic records and the DNA profiling. These are primary identifiers. That is very, very important. The secondary identifiers are the tattoos, the scars, the clothing, and the jewelry. Why teeth? Why teeth is the hero here? Because teeth are highly durable and they are resistant to fire and decomposition. They are extremely resilient, so they stay their ground. And then it's useful in air crashes, in fire disasters, and in high decomposition cases. And this is why we are planning to create a national dental data registry and compare it with the post-mortem findings in case of some disaster. And that's why the comparison between ante-mortem and post-mortem findings are there. And the operational challenges are there is no dedicated DVI incident commander. So who is the commander is a question, and who is going to take charge is there. And then the forensic expert. So we have to have a strong policy making and more schools to study forensics and job opportunities. 3 things. Then overburdened forensic science labs. So this again gives to creation of new labs. The mortuary space is constrained, and climate change, again when floods are there, it washes away the body. So again, displacing body is one factor, heat accelerating decomposition is one factor, and during landslides the cases of the bodies being fragmented is another case. So these are all the challenges that we have before us. So with that, we have come to the prelims practice question of the day. Consider the following statements with disaster victim identification. According to the Interpol guidelines, fingerprints, dental examination, and DNA profiling are primary identifiers in DVI. Yes, forensic odontology is useful only extreme statement. It's not used only in cases where fingerprints are available. Teeth is universally helping us to identify the person. The third one is the National Disaster Management Authority is a statutory body under the Disaster Management Act 2005. So the second statement is wrong. The third statement is right. So anything with 2 would have to go. So the answer would be 1 and 3 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is 1 and 3 only. With this, we have come to the end of the third topic of the day, and let's move into the mains topic. So the mains topic for the day is something very, very important for the GS2 angle. This can also be used in a lot of examples. So today, the migration pattern is so high and the working pattern is so different that a lot of people work abroad. So when they claim their divorce, should the Indian courts be able to stop a proceeding in another country? And this creates a recurring question. So when a marriage is rooted in one legal system, but it is seen in another country. What is the court's jurisdiction? Is the question. So the issue raised is that Indian courts can restrain a spouse from pursuing divorce proceedings abroad when the marriage was under the Indian law, because foreign courts see marriage as something that is a legal entity, but we have our traditions rooted in it in India. So the aspect of getting a divorce proceeding is also very, very common. So should this be there is the question. The present case is that in 2026, there was a marriage under the Christian rites, but then it was registered in India. Now the divorce was initiated in USA. The wife claims that the husband is forum shopping, that is, going to a court where he gets favorable results. And she says that it is a matrimonial abuse because he's gone to US, he's talking differently. It's a matrimonial abuse, and the law in India should protect my fundamental rights. And again, it's a violation of the Indian personal law. Legal question is, when foreign divorce proceedings defeat Indian matrimonial law, what should justice be made of? Now, the section 13 says that the foreign judgment is not conclusive. A foreign judgment can be invalid in India if it is passed without jurisdiction, is not on merit, is against the Indian law, is obtained by fraud, that is like forum shopping, and just like Rawls states, it's opposed to natural justice. Section 14 states presumption of jurisdiction. Section 44A states execution of degrees from reciprocating territories, subject to Section 13 conditions. So, Indian Divorce Act, it governs divorce amongst Christians in India, and the Marriage Act does not override personal and law restrictions. The key principles is that the solemnization and dissolutions, who governs this? It is governed by the personal law, it is governed by both the parties' domiciles, it's governed by the competent jurisdiction. But the Supreme Court held that the degree is valid only if it is granted by a court of competent jurisdiction. It cannot be in some other area where they will get favorable results, and it should be recognized by the Indian law, and it should be submitted to the jurisdiction. If not, the degree is not enforceable in India. And this also protects the Indian spouses from unilateral foreign divorces and jurisdictional manipulation. So the governing case, the Modi Entertainment versus WSJ Cricket, is a money laundering case. Again, it has implications of cross-border courts being involved. So there was an order that stopped the proceedings in the court in the foreign. So in what principles do you get the anti-suit injunctions is when there is discretionary power, when the defendant is able to have the provision to get justice in the Indian system, and preventing injustice must happen, and also must have judicial respect to the courts of both the areas. So, the Indian courts can prevent execution within India. Within India, I can say, and within India, I can also tell that I do not recognize whatever has happened in foreign. But the foreign degree obtained despite Indian injunction can be refused to be enforced in India. That also can be there. So there are two sides to this coin. It cannot nullify the degree abroad. It cannot control the foreign property and enforcement. That is, the jurisdiction type is, it is over individual and it is not over territory. So the issues involved here are 1. Forum shopping, 2. Transnational abuse, 3. The gender justice that needs to be prevailed, a conflict of laws in different countries, comity versus sovereignty, Broader policy issues is we need a clearer private international law framework. So, policy making in international law. The matrimonial recognition and stronger safeguard for vulnerable spouses who go to different spaces and different countries. Now, the constitutional provisions are it violates Article 14, Article 21, and protection against economic coercion. So, these are three principles that we see. Now, we come to the mains practice question for the day. Foreign matrimonial degrees often raise complex questions of jurisdiction, personal law, and constitutional protection. Discuss the legal principles governing the recognition of foreign divorce degrees in India. Examine the role of anti-suit injunction safeguarding in transnational matrimonial dispute. So, this is the mains practice question for the day. Okay, we have come to the prelims focus for the day and we have three important topics. The first one is the India International Arbitration Center. This center is coming under Act. The Act is where it's established under, that is the India International Arbitration Center Act 2019. The objective is that it wants to create an independent and autonomous regime for the institutional arbitration. So with this, the second topic is conservation of India in Indo-Pacific leopard sharks. Leopard sharks are a type of sharks which are very prominent, but it has very low efforts in case of its conservation. So this is an endangered species. So again, to rewild this leopard sharks, they are bringing an initiative from Thailand. The location is in the Phuket Island of Thailand. The objective is to revive the leopard shark population and bring it back to the wild. The collaboration is between Thai government aquarium and the NGOs, and the release of 7 leopard shark pups into the wild. This is the leopard shark. You can see it has designs just like a leopard. And the third is Plastic India. It's the 12th edition of this triennial event, which means 3 times it happens among the world's largest plastic exhibitions. This time it's held in New Delhi with the support of Department of Chemicals and Petrochemicals and Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. 5 strategic pillars are trade, technology, talent, tradition and tourism. The theme is Bharat Next. The significance is it aligns with the Prime Minister's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, that is Make in India. So with this we've come to the prelims practice question for the day. With reference to Plastic India, consider the following statements. It's a triennial event representing the 12th edition of one of the world's largest plastic exhibitions. It is being held in New Delhi with the support of Department of Chemicals and Petrochemicals under the Ministry of Chemicals and Chemical Fertilizers. One of the strategic pillars is sustainability. No, everything starts with T, talent, tourism. So 3 should be wrong and the answer should be 2 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is 2 only. With this, we have come to the end of the prelims focus for the day and thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel and thank you for watching today's video.